Hello and welcome to our broadcast. I'm your host, Brett Burrow. As a reminder, the information provided during this event is for educational purposes only. It is not intended, nor is it implied to be a substitute for professional medical advice. If you have any questions regarding medical conditions or treatment plans, please consult your physician. Now let's begin. Joining me today is Dr. David Brown, family physician and sports medicine specialist at Providence Medical Group. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm actually very excited because of what we're going to be discussing, which is the Olympics. But before we actually delve into the Olympics talk, can you tell us a little bit more about what your role here is at Providence?
Sure. Well, it's morphed over the years, but currently I'm full-time sports medicine, so that means different things to different people. But I do primary care sports medicine, so that's non-surgical sports medicine. So we deal with kind of orthopedic injuries, overuse injuries, and medical conditions that impact performance.
And so what, like, would it only be an athlete, or could someone like me come and see a doctor like you, just so that if people aren't sure how this all works?
Someone exactly like you could come see sports medicine. We see everybody, really anyone who's seeking an active lifestyle, we take care of. I'd love to say that the athletes that you're seeing at the Olympics are the same ones that fill up my clinic on a daily basis, but we have a lot of kind of recreational athletes. We have people who are just involved in fitness, and we have some people that just injured themselves other ways. During COVID, it seemed to be more of a landscaping medicine clinic because everyone was fine until they hauled a load of bark dust or gravel or did all these things in the yard. So it's different every day, but we take care of everybody and everything.
But you were actually part of the medical team for the Olympic track and field hopefuls this past year?
Yeah, that's correct. So got to be down at Hayward Field in Eugene and cover 5 days of the event. So it was just fabulous to be part of that.
How did you get involved with that? Sounds
it's kind of an interesting story. I went into sports medicine with the idea of wanting to take care of athletes of that caliber, but early in my career, never had the opportunity until I actually retired from being in the Army, and I joined Providence, and I got invited to speak at a lecture, and I didn't know where I was speaking or who I was speaking to, and it just so happened it was the 2016 World Indoor Track and Field Championships in Portland.
Oh wow!
And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be at the event. So I reached out to our leadership, Chris Van Wagner down in Portland, and asked, is there any way that I could potentially be involved? Could I just shadow the medical team? Because I'm sure you have everything covered. And she said, oh, well, if you're interested, you could do coverage. And I was like, what? And so I covered the World Indoor Track and Field Championships as my initial kind of brush with these great athletes. And then while I was there, people started talking to me and saying, oh, so you're coming to the Olympic trials, right? And I was like, yeah. And so once you get your foot in the door, sometimes that's kind of your way in to continue to get invited back, which was fortunately what happened this year.
So what were some of the responsibilities that you had during that week?
What you watch on TV is just a small portion of what goes on at these events. And so there's a whole, and start to practice, kind of in the final phases of getting ready for their events. And then there's the actual events themselves. And then some athletes are staying afterwards and still seeking medical care through us. So if you look at what physicians are involved with, we have a main medical tent where we provide this kind of tent medicine. People who come in with either injuries or with medical illness that need to be evaluated. And we also cover the recovery area outside of the main track. So they come in after their competition and maybe something pulled, maybe they're not feeling well. So we're there to ensure their safety after the event. And then we also provide roaming coverage around the event. So there's a team of physicians and athletic trainers distributed around the events that are going on.
Were you the only one from Providence, or was there a team of you that
There was a whole team. So our lead for the event, Chris Van Wagner, she's the director of sports medicine for Providence down in Portland, Oregon. She's kind of the lead. She's a physical therapist by training, but for the event, she was like the coordinator, go-to woman for everything involved for scheduling. We had Breanne Brown, no relation, is a sports medicine doctor, and she's the director of sports medicine down there in Portland from the medical side. I actually got to reconnect with one of my former Army colleagues who's now with Providence down in Medford, Oregon, in Southern Oregon. So he participated, and then I was really happy to invite one of our former residents from here in Olympia, Washington, who now works down in Salem, Oregon, Dr. Alana Ryan. She also provided medical coverage at the event.
That is so cool. Kind of, you get a very collaborative Providence representation there, but then cool that you got to run into a former, colleague or of yours from like back in the day. But how many athletes are at these things? Like,
There's
hundreds?
hundreds of athletes and their personal coaches, and there's the race officials and people from USA, Tracktown USA. There's a host of people there, either performing or supporting the performance of the athletes. In our role, we were taking care of primarily the athletes, but then also if by chance a race official went down, which was a big concern for the events this year, just because of how hot it was. We were up in the upper 90s. I left during the major heat wave, but they got up to 113 degrees on the last weekend of competition. And
wow.
So you're taking care of all the people involved. So
can I ask then also, was there a lot of concern because we are still amidst this pandemic? So
that added a huge twist. There's, for an event that size, in the past, some of the concerns may be surrounding security of event. But with COVID, that you're really concerned about the medical illness side. And so we had to get, and athletes as well, get pre-screened before you arrived. So we had to have a PCR test even though I'm immunized, as I'm sure a lot of other folks are. But we had to have a PCR test prior to, and then upon arrival, you got retested. And then every other day while you were there, you got retested again. And so it's a very rigorous process to ensure the safety of the athletes and those supporting them.
Do you think that had any impact on anyone's mental health?
Well, I think, COVID really impacted this Olympics, just from the perspective of delaying the Olympics themselves and, of course, the Olympic trials. And so people's normal, 4-year training program became a 5-year training program to peak for this event. And that creates stress. And in some cases, and you'll hear stories as you listen to the events on TV, where some athletes had major injuries and actually the extra time allowed them to recover and be able to participate. But a lot of the athletes, it's just that they have to alter the way they're training because everything is so detail managed to peak at the right time. But from a mental illness or mental fitness kind of perspective, I think it definitely impacted, and we saw that play out pretty prominently at this event.
Yeah. What were the things that you would find unique or different about working with these types of Olympic athletes?
Well, a lot of us may consider ourselves athletes, um, but we're not anywhere near the caliber of these individuals. They're just uniquely gifted. And so just to watch them perform, a lot of times in sports medicine, we're watching people's movement patterns and things, and they are just such perfect machines for their particular events. It's just amazing to watch. And so we're not there to, like in our clinic, we would be maybe giving basic, exercise, rehabilitative education, things of that nature. We're not involved in that role here. I mean, they have coaches, they have their own kind of contingent that helps them prepare. So really, we're there to try to get to keep athletes in the competition who may have an illness or injury, or in some cases, advise them that they should not be competing for their own safety. But I would say the thing that I was most impressed with is just the caliber of of physical attributes that these athletes bring to their sport.
That's that's pretty impressive coming from someone like you who does study the movement of people. I wish I was more athletic, but didn't get those traits. In what ways, though, do you feel that your training to date helped equip you to be there? Because I mean, obviously, you're dealing with a very high level.
Right. Well, I actually trained in the military. So I was in the Army for 25 years, and
For your service.
And thank you. And in the Army, you're forced to be an athlete, maybe whether you want to be or not. And so not everyone is physically gifted, but there are a lot of physically gifted, kind of what we refer to as warrior athletes. And so just years of taking care of warrior athletes, whether it was back here in the States or, overseas, I think it really equips you well. But a big part of that is just, understanding, where your athlete is coming from and what their goals are. And that doesn't really change, on an individual level. Everybody has where they're at and where they want to be. The Olympic athletes are just at a much higher level than most of us would aspire to. But same thing happens at the Olympic trials. It's like, okay, so what's the injury? What's the illness? Where are you at? When's your competition? What do we need to do? And those are just kind of common questions, that you look at when patients present to you, because there's always an end goal in mind.
I think I would imagine too the difference between, or the similarities between being in the Army or in the military of some sort and an athlete is the discipline. Whereas someone like me, if I came to a doctor like you can tell me to do these things, and depending upon how serious I really, am about fixing this injury, I may maybe commit to it, maybe for like a month or like a week or whatever it is. But these so much of like these athletes, like livelihoods, actually, and I would imagine too when you're in the military, so much of your success is about the discipline.
Right, that's absolutely true. You really don't get athletes who are at the Olympic trials who are, fighting against the input or not listening to the input that they're provided. I would say it's very common to see patients in clinic, identify what's going on, or at least an evaluation plan, get them going on treatments, and then have them come back and have them be in the same exact spot, and they didn't do anything that you asked. And then they're surprised that they didn't get the results that they expected. Don't really see that with Olympic athletes. They're as you mentioned, they're very disciplined, and that's all facets that sometimes we lose sight of. it's not just the training, it's the sleep, it's the nutrition, it's the mental resiliency and mental fitness part of it that's really critical. So it's a whole different level of patient that we're taking care of at the Olympic trials, for sure.
So you just mentioned a little bit about how athletics was a part of your 25 years in the Army, but how did you become interested in sports medicine while you were serving? What was
that? I actually became interested in it when I was in medical school. My sports medicine fellowship training was done through the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences in Bethesda, Maryland. And I remember as a second year student seeing an advertisement for sports medicine training, and it touted how, doctors got to take care of Olympic athletes. I was like, oh my gosh, that's what I want to do. So from that point on, my career pointed that direction. I started with my training in family medicine, which is my kind of foundational training, and then several years later, I was able to get into the sports medicine fellowship in Washington, D.C. And I'd always wanted to be involved with that high caliber of athlete. Our main program for that in the Army is the World Class Athlete Program in Colorado Springs. And unfortunately, that's a position that only comes available very rarely, and it didn't happen to come available for me. It did come available for some of my colleagues, which is amazing for them to be able to participate in that. But it's just, as soon as I found out that was a possibility, being very sports minded myself, that's just is what I wanted to do. It was just a passion.
That's really cool. So now getting here was kind of like your own personal little dream come true, or sort of seeing the fruits of your labor actually pay off.
Right. Very much so.
So now that the Olympics are actually on now, are there any athletes that you saw or that you trained or helped out in June that you're now watching?
It makes it very different, when you're watching after having covered the event. I think we were very fortunate this Olympic trials that we really didn't have a ton of injuries, and I'm not sure what we can attribute that to. There were certainly some major injuries that occurred during the event, but I would say compared to when I covered in 2016, there was less. And so I covered in those different kind of aspects: the recovery area, the main medical tent, and then out around the venue. And I would say what I became kind of most interested in this year, and it's not necessarily an event that I'd normally follow, but like the 400-meter hurdles, I think has just been a fascinating story this year. And Sydney McLaughlin is just an amazing athlete. So I've been watching with great interest as she competes. And I think it's just a great story too between her and Delilah Muhammad, former world record holder, current world record holder, and just kind of, even though they're competing against each other, it's really, I think, a very healthy, competition, and they're both mutually supportive. So I've been watching that with great interest. And then, like on the men's side, we have Rai Benjamin. I didn't get an opportunity to take care of him, but I was present when he was training out at one of the local community college tracks during the trials, and just the intensity that he trained with when he was training solo. There wasn't anyone there. I mean, I'm sure he had a coach there pushing him, but there was no other athletes pushing him. He was just grueling in his training, especially that close to the competition time. And so it's been pretty amazing watching him compete as well.
How do you think that this experience will enhance your practice going forward, or do you think it will have any impact on your practice at all?
I mean, I think as I mentioned, competing at that level it's really contingent on a lot of factors: the training itself, the the activity, the nutrition, the sleep, and the psychological aspects. So one thing I've always wanted to have, and hopefully will at some point, is a multidisciplinary team. If you looked at what it took to bring athletes to the Olympic trials, it was a whole multidisciplinary effort. So, I mean, fortunately, the physician side is relatively small, actually, but you have athletic trainers, you have physical therapists, you have massage therapists. We didn't have any psychologists that I know of on our team, but a lot of the athletes have their own sports psychologists that they work with. I think if anything that I would take away from the experience is that it takes a multidisciplinary team to take care of people properly. And so I think that's true for Olympic athletes and for, recreational athletes as well.
Definitely. I have asked you so many questions, so I feel like we're getting towards the end of this, but was there anything else that you wanted to add or say before we wrap things up?
Oh, put me on the spot.
Right.
I don't know. I don't think there's anything else that I would add independent of what I was saying, but
how about this? Any advice for someone who wants to go into sports medicine or perhaps wants to work with Olympic athletes in the future that you would give them?
Yeah, I guess, kind of what I learned as I went through the system, the training, getting ready to go to medical school residency, is that a lot of times people have interest even before they get into medicine. So in their undergraduate studies, and me, I chose kind of the typical path to biology and chemistry, which obviously applies, but not perfectly in sports medicine. Looking back, with the retrospectoscope, I would have chosen something, like kinesiology, something that studies, movement, health, performance, nutrition, those types of things where, in medical school, surprisingly, doctors don't get as much training in those aspects, and they're really important. And so looking back undergraduate, I would have certainly focused on that. And then I guess I would have thought about some of the principles of, staying healthy myself, that sometimes get lost when you're in that level of training. You lose a lot of sleep, you don't eat well. I remember in residency, one of the things where I trained the Otis Spunkmeyer cookie people would bring in all the broken cookies. And I don't know how many days. My main lunch would be broken cookie pieces. And so as I look back on that, it's just like it would have been great to focus more on the sleep and the nutrition and staying physically active, not getting run down and burnt out. And I think that's important lessons for all of us. Especially
actually this last year where life has changed so much. I think it's, to your point, it's important that we take care of ourselves no matter what. But I think right now, as we're still navigating COVID, I think it's extra important that we all take care of ourselves and we get sleep, we eat right, we try to work out and exercise within and not push ourselves to the point that we get an injury. But
right.
Those
yard working projects.
Yeah, exactly. Don't go out there and try to become like a professional yard person, without doing any. Actually, it's funny. I actually have a friend's husband that pulled throughout his back over the winter trying to plow their driveway. And during COVID, it's like the same thing. She was like, "Why didn't you stretch?" He goes, "I was just going to plow the snow." I think we sometimes, especially this last year, we've been so sedentary. Mm-hmm. We're not really thinking about how these things that we maybe would have done in the past can, have actually hurt us now without preparation. So
right.
I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. I think that's so interesting and amazing terms of your own career, but also just in general, just hearing about these Olympic athletes and what this whole experience was like, because, I think every one of us is just always in awe of them. And thank you everyone else for listening today and for sending in any of your questions. If you're looking for medical advice, please visit providence.org and make sure to follow us on social media at Providence on Twitter and under Providence Health System on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And you can find me on herfeed.com or follow at the herfeed. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.